He stood in the middle of the living room, anger burning in his eyes. "I can't do this anymore," he snapped. "You bring nothing but bad luck into this house." His wife, heavily pregnant, stood frozen. Her brown skin glistened with sweat, her hands trembling as she held her belly. "Please, listen to me," she said softly. "You know I've never wished you harm." "Enough," he cut her off sharply. "You talk too much. Always arguing, always questioning. I'm tired of your bad mouth and your bad luck." Her eyes widened in disbelief. "Bad luck? Is that what you call the woman who stood by you when you had nothing?" He turned away coldly, straightening his designer suit. "I don't need pity stories. I'm done. Take your things and go tonight." "Go!" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Where do you want me to go?" "I'm carrying your child." He didn't flinch. His pride was louder than his conscience. "Then take the child with you. I don't want to hear your voice again." Tears streamed down her face as she picked up a small bag near the sofa. The driver hesitated at the door, unsure whether to obey. "Open the gate," the billionaire barked. "Now!" The maid standing nearby lowered her head, crying silently. The woman turned once more toward her husband, eyes filled with pain. "One day," she said softly, "you'll look for me, but I'll be far above your reach." She walked out slowly, clutching her stomach, into the dark night. Inside, silence fell. But that silence would not last, because destiny had just begun to turn. The night swallowed her as she stepped out through the iron gates. The rain had just started to fall, washing the dust off the empty streets. She walked barefoot, holding her swollen belly with one hand and her small bag with the other. Every step hurt, not just from exhaustion, but from betrayal. Cars sped past her without slowing down. She had once been driven in one of those cars, treated like royalty. Now, she was invisible, another pregnant woman in the rain, lost and broken. By the time she reached the main road, her dress was soaked through. The cold air bit her skin, and the world blurred through her tears. She tried to wave down a taxi, but none stopped. "Please," she whispered, but her voice was drowned by the storm. After what felt like hours, she reached a small bus stop. The wooden shelter leaked from every corner, but it was the only roof she had. She sat there, shivering, one hand on her stomach. "It's okay," she whispered to the unborn child. "Mommy's here. We'll survive this." A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "Are you all right, sister?" She looked up to see an older woman in a faded wrapper, holding an umbrella. Her face was wrinkled but kind, her dark skin glowing under the flickering streetlight. "You shouldn't be out here," the woman said, sitting beside her. "You look like you've been through war." Tears welled up again. "He threw me out," the young woman said, her voice breaking. "My husband, he said I was bad luck." The older woman sighed deeply. "Men forget, but God doesn't." She handed her a small piece of bread wrapped in nylon. "Eat this. It's not much, but it'll keep your strength." The young woman took it with shaky hands. That simple act of kindness, that one bit of warmth in the cold, felt like a miracle. For the first time that night, she smiled faintly. "Thank you, Ma," she whispered. "I'll never forget this." The woman nodded and said, "You don't have to. Just promise me something. When your time comes and God lifts you up, never forget those who stood by you when you were nothing." Those words would echo in her mind for years. By morning, the rain had stopped. The sun rose gently over Lagos, painting the city gold again. She looked at the horizon, tired but determined. She had lost her home, her comfort, and her pride, but not her will to fight. She wiped her face, took a deep breath, and whispered to her unborn child, "We start again today." And that was exactly what she did. Weeks turned into months, and the city of Lagos became both her battlefield and her teacher. Life had stripped her of everything: luxury, love, and even her name in the eyes of those who once bowed to her. But deep inside, something unbroken burned like fire, a determination to rise again, not for revenge but for her child. She found shelter in a small compound behind an old market in Mushin. The walls were cracked, the roof leaked, and the nights were filled with noise, crying babies, arguing neighbors, and the sound of distant generators. Yet, For her, it was home. Her belly grew heavier, and each morning she would sit by the window, watching people rush to work, wondering how she would ever rebuild her life. One day, she walked into a local shop, hoping to get a cleaning job. The owner, a woman in her 50s with deep brown skin and sharp eyes, looked her over. "You don't look like someone who should be scrubbing floors," the woman said. "I'll do anything," she replied quickly, her voice steady but humble. "I just need to survive." The woman stared for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Fine, come early tomorrow. The pay is small but honest." And that's how her new life began, sweeping, scrubbing, and mopping. Each day, she worked with quiet strength, her hands blistered, her feet aching. The other cleaners whispered about her. Some mocked, others pitied, but she never complained. At night, she returned to her tiny room, whispering prayers over her unborn baby. "You'll never suffer like this," she would say. "One day, I'll give you the life you deserve." When the time came, she gave birth in a small government hospital. No fancy doctors, no flowers, no husband holding her hand. Just the sound of her baby's first cry and her own tears of relief. The nurses smiled warmly. "Congratulations, madam," one said, wrapping the baby in a faded pink cloth. She looked at her daughter's tiny face. Dark skin, soft curls, and bright eyes. A new beginning wrapped in innocence. She named her Grace. Months passed. She returned to work with the baby tied to her back. Her boss often scolded her for being slow, but she kept going. The customers, however, noticed her quiet strength, the way she smiled even after cleaning their muddy shoes, the way she sang softly while mopping the floors. One day, a customer in a gray suit watched her carefully as she wiped the glass door. "You're too smart to be doing this," he said. She smiled faintly. "Sometimes life teaches you in strange classrooms." He nodded. "Keep that spirit. The world turns when we least expect it." Those words stuck with her. And indeed, the world was turning, quietly behind the scenes. One evening, as she walked home with her baby asleep on her back, she saw a poster on a wall. King Tech Innovation Summit, looking for fresh voices and new ideas. Her heart raced. Before her husband had thrown her out, she had studied business management and helped draft proposals for his company. The same company he had built using her ideas. Now, fate had thrown her a lifeline. She stared at the poster, her mind racing. The summit was only a week away, and registration cost more than she could afford. Still, she whispered to herself, if God could carry me through the rain, he can carry me into this room. That night, she sold her last gold earring, borrowed a pen from her neighbor, and filled out the form by candlelight. Her handwriting trembled, but her heart was steady. For the first time in a long while, she felt something she had forgotten. Hope. The next chapter of her life was waiting, and she was finally ready to walk into it. The morning of the summit arrived with a soft haze over Lagos. The city was alive. Cars honking, street vendors calling, and the rising hum of ambition in the air. But for her, everything felt strangely still. She stood in front of a cracked mirror, adjusting the only decent dress she owned, a faded blue gown she had patched 3 times already. It wasn't luxury, but it was clean. She pressed her hair neatly, tied a plain scarf around her head, and whispered, "Today, my story changes." With her baby, Grace, left in the care of her kind neighbor, she stepped out into morning sun. The road to the event was long, and she had no taxi fare. Still, she walked, barefoot for half the journey, until her feet ached and her heart pounded. But she never stopped. When she finally arrived at the gates of the Lagos Convention Center, she froze. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Men in suits and women in glittering gowns stepped out, their laughter echoing in the air. Security guards moved about briskly, checking invitations and badges. She clutched her small bag tightly, the invitation letter printed on cheap paper. When she reached the gate, one of the guards frowned. "Madam, are you sure you're in the right place?" "Yes," she said, showing her pass. "I registered online." The guard laughed softly. All right, go in, but don't go where you don't belong." She smiled politely and walked through, ignoring the stares. Inside, the hall shimmered, golden lights, marble floors, massive screens flashing the words King Tech Innovation Summit 2025. Everywhere she looked, people were networking, exchanging business cards, taking selfies. She felt like an outsider, invisible, unwanted. Still, she moved quietly to the back of the room, clutching her notes. The event began. On stage to the host, a tall, dark-skinned man in an expensive tuxedo, his voice deep and commanding. He spoke of success, innovation, and the future of African business. The crowd applauded after every line. Then came the CEO of King Tech himself, her ex-husband. He walked onto the stage, confident and proud, dressed in a sharp white agbada embroidered with gold. Cameras flashed. Everyone stood to clap, but she just stared, frozen in place, her heart pounding so loudly it drowned out his words. He spoke of his achievements, his rise from nothing to one of Nigeria's wealthiest men. He smiled that same cold smile she remembered, the one that used to make her feel small. And then the host announced, "We're inviting members of the audience to pitch their business ideas. The best one wins 50 million Nigerian nairas in startup funding and mentorship from our CEO himself." A murmur ran through the crowd. People began lining up to present. She clutched her file tightly, whispering, "You didn't come this far to freeze now." When her turn came, the crowd went silent. She walked slowly to the stage, barefoot. Her shoes had broken earlier on the road. The audience whispered, some giggling, some sneering. "Who let the maid in?" someone muttered. But she ignored them. Her voice shook at first as she began her pitch. Speaking of small businesses, digital access for the poor, and how real innovation begins at the grassroots. Then, as she spoke, her voice grew stronger, her passion clearer. Every eye turned toward her. Even the billionaire's smile faded into confusion. He recognized her voice before he recognized her face. And then it hit him. The woman he had thrown out of his mansion was standing before him, speaking to a global audience. The room grew still. When she finished, there was silence, heavy electric silence. Then, from the back, a few people began to clap. It spread slowly, rising into thunderous applause. Even the judges looked impressed. She stood there, tears in her eyes, clutching her notes, bowing slightly. "Thank you," she whispered. As she stepped off the stage, she passed right by her ex-husband. Their eyes met, his full of disbelief, hers full of strength. She didn't need revenge. Her success spoke louder than any anger ever could. And for the first time in his life, the billionaire felt something he hadn't felt in years: regret. The hall buzzed with murmurs long after she stepped off the stage. Everyone was still talking about the barefoot woman who had spoken like a visionary. Even the judges, industry titans, politicians, and entrepreneurs, were stunned by her confidence, clarity, and raw truth. But the billionaire CEO sat frozen, his heart pounding in disbelief. He couldn't take his eyes off her. The voice, the poise, the subtle scar above her eyebrow. It was her, the same woman he had kicked out of his mansion months ago. He shifted in his seat, trying to compose himself as the event continued. But nothing else registered. Not the speeches, not the laughter, not the awards. His mind was trapped in one memory. The night he'd called her bad luck. The night he'd thrown her out while she begged, heavily pregnant under the rain. Now here she was, standing in the spotlight he thought he alone deserved. When the final presentation ended, the host walked back to the stage with a smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "you've just witnessed brilliance tonight." But one presentation stood out, not because of money, power, or fame, but because of heart and vision. The winner of the 50 million Nigerian Naira's King Tech Innovation Fund is... The lights dimmed. The screen behind him flashed with golden letters. Evelyn Grace Foundation, empowering women through tech. Gasps filled the room. Cameras zoomed in. The audience turned toward her. She stood there, stunned, the file still in her hand. People began clapping, some rising to their feet. The host called her forward. "Please welcome our winner, Miss Evelyn Grace." As she walked to the stage, her ex-husband rose slowly, his hands trembling. His mind spun in chaos. Evelyn Grace. That was her mother's name. Could it be? The host handed her the microphone. "Tell us, Evelyn, what inspired this idea?" She took a deep breath, her voice steady but emotional. "I was once told I would never amount to anything, that because I had nothing, I was nothing. But I learned that sometimes God lets you lose everything so you can find yourself." The crowd erupted in applause. She continued, "This foundation is not just mine. It belongs to every woman who's been silenced, abandoned, or called worthless. Because pain can either destroy you or build you. I chose to build." From the corner of the hall, the billionaire lowered his head. Her words struck like arrows. She paused, turning slowly toward him. Their eyes met under the stage lights. The entire hall followed her gaze. Then she smiled faintly and said, "And to the man who once said I'd never stand on my feet again, thank you. You made me stronger." The audience gasped. Whispers spread like wildfire. Journalists raised their cameras. The billionaire froze, his throat dry. After the ceremony, he slipped quietly out of the hall, away from the flashing cameras and curious eyes. He walked into the cold night, his heart heavy with regret. Later that evening, as Evelyn packed her files into a small bag, a knock came on the dressing room door. She turned, and there he was. He looked different, his face pale, his voice low. "Evelyn," he said softly, "I didn't know. I never thought." She cut him off gently. "You didn't need to think. You just needed to care." He sighed, stepping closer. "I was proud, arrogant. I thought I had everything, but I had nothing without you. Please, let me make things right." She looked at him quietly for a long moment, then shook her head. "It's not about making things right anymore. It's about understanding why you were wrong." He bowed his head. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "You don't," she said calmly. "But forgiveness isn't something we earn. It's something we give so we can be free." Tears filled his eyes. "Will you ever forgive me?" She smiled faintly. "I already have." He stood there silently, watching her walk away, strong, graceful, and at peace. Outside, flashes of cameras greeted her as she exited the hall. People shouted her name. The woman who was once homeless and heartbroken had become an inspiration. And somewhere in the corner of that glittering event, the billionaire sat in silence, clapping softly, because for the first time, he was proud of someone other than himself. The night sky over Lagos glittered with city lights as Evelyn's convoy pulled into the same neighborhood where her life had fallen apart months ago. The crowd of villagers, market women, and young girls holding banners that read, "Evelyn Grace, our inspiration," filled the street. Camera flashes caught every moment, but Evelyn wasn't thinking about fame. Her eyes were on a small bungalow at the end of the road, the one she used to call home. She stepped out of the car dressed in a long, flowing white gown that shimmered softly under the streetlights. Her brown skin glowed like polished bronze, her hair tied neatly in a bun. She looked every bit the strong, reborn woman she'd become, elegant yet humble. The same old gate creaked open, and the air grew still. The man who once threw her out stood there, his once sharp suit replaced by worn clothes, his eyes tired and his confidence gone. He couldn't even lift his gaze. The crowd murmured, some pointing, others whispering. Evelyn stood before him, calm, composed, her hands clasped gently. He fell to his knees. "Evelyn, I was blind," he whispered. "I called you bad luck, but you were the best thing that ever happened to me. Please forgive me." The air thickened with emotion. Even the wind seemed to stop. Evelyn looked at him for a long time before replying. Her voice was soft but carried the power of truth. "Forgiveness isn't about you, Daniel. It's about freeing myself from the pain you gave me. I forgave you long ago." He lifted his head, eyes wet. "You're different now." "I am," she said, "because I found purpose in my pain." She turned toward the crowd and continued, "Every woman here who's been told she's worthless, listen to me. You are not. The world may laugh at your struggle today, but they will one day stand to honor your strength. Don't let bitterness bury your destiny." Applause broke out. Some women began crying. Others shouted her name in pride. Then, unexpectedly, Evelyn reached down and helped her ex-husband to his feet. "You're not my enemy," she said softly. You're just part of the story that made me who I am." He lowered his head, unable to speak. Evelyn turned to the press, smiling. This isn't revenge. This is closure. Behind her, the new foundation banner fluttered in the evening breeze. The Grace Foundation, restoring lives, rebuilding hope. Children gathered around her, laughing and cheering. The once broken woman was now their symbol of hope. She handed out scholarships, hugged widows, and announced free skill training for young mothers, turning her pain into purpose for others. As the music began, drums, voices, and soft gospel hymns filling the night, Evelyn stood on the stage overlooking her community. Her ex-husband watched from the crowd, tears streaming silently as he saw her lift her hands toward the sky. "Thank you, Lord," she said, "for showing me that rejection was just redirection." The people erupted in applause. The night sky lit up with fireworks, painting the air in red and gold. The camera zoomed out, showing Evelyn smiling in the glow of the lights, surrounded by the same people who once pitted her. Now, they celebrated her. Across the screen, the final words appeared in gold letters. "Sometimes, God lets you be broken, so you can rebuild others stronger." Sparkle's moral lesson: never let pain harden your heart. The people who reject you today might be the reason you rise tomorrow. Stay kind, stay strong, and let your success be the story that heals others.